That was the difference between me making second class and me not making second class. I needed to get better at what I do. I had a lot of book knowledge, but I didn't do very well on tests, and it wasn't very good at practical application. I want to tell you a story about Lieutenant J.G. Michelini. So again, from time to time, I'll step away from the mic because some of this stuff I can just talk about. And I want to make sure I stay on track, so I've got notes. Mr. Michelini was in my duty section on the submarine. The duty section is the people that are on duty for a particular day. And Mr. Michelini was our duty officer in my section. He was a double E major from an Ivy League university. I can't remember which one. But he was a very smart guy, as all our nuclear power officers are. Congratulations. Mr. Michelini, being in the duty section, he knew that I was an electrical guy. He knew how I'd done on the test, and he decided to kind of take me under his wing. And we sat in the wardroom, and we drew electrical circuits, and I calculated resistance and capacitance and inductive reactance and all of those kinds of things. And we went through all the electrical important things. He was a double E major, remember? And he knew how to make it practical for me. He knew how to make it real. And I passed the first class examination with a 200. You only needed 100 to pass. All right? I knocked it out of the park. All right? Why did I knock it out of the park? Because of Lieutenant J.G. Michelini. That's why. He cared. That guy cared. He took time out of his busy day, and it's busy on a submarine, and he sat down with me every duty day in the wardroom and went over circuits with me and taught me. Lieutenant J.G. Michelini cared. He made a difference. He took time for me. I will never forget him. There are two sides to every coin. There are positive experiences, and there are those in which people struggle. You do not get to choose what comes your way or the cards you're dealt. The first-class petty officer, that first-class petty officer that I spoke about, he had a family with 2 children. The pressures of life were closing in. Alcohol seemed an appropriate respite from the duties aboard ship, but it was not. So Petty Officer Polk was headed down a very bad road. One Friday night, walking back to Kings Bay, Georgia, from Jacksonville, Florida, I was walking on the interstate. That'll tell you something about my state of mind. I began cutting my wrist. I didn't want to die. I just wanted the pain to go away. Life seemed hopeless. I had achieved great success, but I was overwhelmed. When my command learned of my actions, leadership from my division officer, which is what you will be, my commanding officer stepped up to help. They gave me time to be with my family and get things worked out. They could have easily sent me packing, but they chose to care, and their patience gave me the time to right my ship. Robert Fulghum authored the book, All I Really Need to Know, I Learned in Kindergarten. Here's just an example or a sample of those things. I think there's about 20 on the list, actually. Here's some of them. Share everything. Play fair. Don't hit people. Put things back where you found them. Clean up your mess. Don't take things that aren't yours. Don't say you're sorry when you hurt somebody. Wash your hands before you eat. I see Mr. Fulgham's point, but I must say that the source is not kindergarten. But it's God's Word, the Bible. After my awakening aboard the USS Vallejo, I gave my heart and life to Jesus Christ. I became more than a petty officer or a chief petty officer in the Navy. I became a child of the King of Kings. And with much prayer and study, I have attempted to lead a life of godly principles. As I shook hands with each of you, I gave you a coin with the 10 Commandments on it. I urge you to live by these standards. We live in a world where principles have become a variable that we can easily change. A principled leadership that has character does not change. In leadership and ethics, of course, we spoke of the Ten Commandments. I know, it's pretty amazing that we would go back to our roots, but they are the bedrock of strong character. And character is not something we read about or study in a classroom. It's what we do in daily life. I spoke of failure in my early days in the Navy. Why? Because you don't read about my failures in my bio. But as Herman Melville has well said, he who has never failed cannot be great. Failure is the test of greatness. It's not how you run the first mile, it's how you run the last mile. As you reflect on your time here at Iowa State, I'm sure there are many highs, but also some lows. Working through challenges makes a strong officer. Here's another example from my career as Chief Engineer of the USS Jarrett. USS Jarrett was a fast frigate. I was stationed in San Diego, California. I have to realize I was an interior communications electrician, so I was an engineer my entire life. On submarines, when I went to surface ships, I was the electrical officer on the battleship New Jersey. I had been in the engineering plant since I was a little guy in the Navy. And now I was the chief engineer, the guy responsible for the engineering plant on the ship. And I failed the operations propulsion plant examination. Many of you that are military folks know that as an OPI. I had gone through ORS, which is an operational reactor safeguards examination on the submarine. And we had passed with flying colors. And every time on the battleship New Jersey, we had passed with flying colors. Now I'm the chief engineer, the guy in charge, and we failed. I remember sitting in the captain's stateroom when they told us that we failed. I was sitting on a chair next to the captain's desk, and the guy that's an inspector is a captain. And I remember him saying, "Lieutenant Holt, you need to get up off the mat." I wanted to reach across the room and hit the guy. I did. I was like, "What? You don't know how hard we worked at this." But you know what they did? That failure, it made me better. It made us as an engineering department better. We had to go back and revisit things that we weren't doing as well as we thought we were doing. So it was a good thing. I didn't like his get up off the mat, but it made a difference. It made a huge difference. And I'm sure those kinds of things will happen for you as well. I don't like failure, and I doubt you do either. But those failures are stepping stones to becoming better leaders. Command at Sea is the pinnacle. I really like it that this group has 4 surface warfare officers. The only guy that's not going to be surface warfare is a Marine. Isn't that perfect? All right, 4 surface warfare officers. Command at Sea is the pinnacle of success in surface warfare. I was honored to have that privilege 3 times. My first opportunity was on the USS Warrior, a mine sweep. I was stationed in Ingleside, Texas. Your captain was a mine sweep CO as well, but he was out on the 20th end of the sphere in Bahrain. As commanding officer there are many decisions that must be made every day. Some decisions are easy, and some are life-changing. I want to give you an example from my time in Warrior. So again, it's about 2 o'clock in the morning. They say nothing good happens after midnight. That's true. I can attest to that. All right? Nothing good happens after midnight. Every call I've ever gotten as a commanding officer after midnight was not good news. Not good news. All right? Sometimes it was personnel issues. Sometimes it was problems with a piece of equipment or something like that. This one happened to be a sinking vessel, and we were the closest vessel to go rescue. Now, if you know anything about a minesweeper, it goes about 10 knots and 12 knots with a good stiff wind. All right? It's not very fast. We're 50 miles away. And my senior chief that called me up, he said, "Captain, we're the closest vessel." So we drove 50 miles down to get this guy. We got there just as it was breaking into daylight, and we put our damage control team on board to try to repair this guy. It was leaking right around his shaft. His shaft seal had failed, and he was taking on water in the people compartment, what we like to call it, the people tank, right? He was getting water in the people tank. And so we put oaken in there, we put wedges in it, we slowed it down. The Coast Guard came and they lowered some pumps to us, and we got the pumps going, and we could keep him afloat, but we couldn't fix him. There was just no way. I mean, he needed to be put in the shipyard and fixed. So the day wore on, and we're thinking, man, there's nothing we can do for this guy. So the choice was, let his vessel sink and take the people on board, and this guy's livelihood, right? So it's like, I can't just let his ship sink. I mean, that's not going to work. I mean, it's just a fishing vessel, it's a shrimper. There are a lot of those guys out in Corpus Christi. And so we decided to take him in tow. Now, I'd never towed anything in my life. Read about it in the book, all right? There's a big difference, let me tell you. Okay, huge difference between reading about it in the book and doing it. Because you got to get them in the ships in step with one another. Okay, they got to kind of ride the waves together. Kind of nice. Otherwise, it's like this all the time. It's kind of like when you're towing somebody. You know, keep tightening up the rope all the time. Okay, that's not really going to work very well. My senior chief says, senior chief boatswain mate, he says, "Oh, no problem, Captain. We can do this." So we put him in tow. We'd start towing them into Corpus Christi, toward Corpus Christi. Now, I told you it was about 50 miles away. We had already been about 10, 15 miles away. So it was like 60 miles to the channel. So we arranged it with the tugboats to pick them up when we get to the channel. And the weather kept getting worse. Kind of like Gilligan's Island, you know. The weather started getting rough, and the tiny ships were tossed, okay? It was kind of just like that, okay? And so we call up the guys that are going to come get us with the tugboats, and they're like, it's too rough out there. We ain't coming out, you got to come in. Now, not only do we have somebody in tow, now we got to go through a very narrow channel, and the winds are setting sideways, okay? So in other words, they're going across the channel like this. So I'm riding here, and the ship behind me is riding over here, and the channel's only yay wide, you know, so you basically, you know, he's missing the rocks and I'm missing the rock, but not by either roads by very much. That's the plan. Well, that's what I thought would happen, right? That's what would need to happen if I wanted to take him in. So here's what happened. My senior chief boatswain mate that I talked to you about, he and I were very close, okay? He was our command senior chief. You don't have a master chief there, so command senior chief. And he knew me very well. He'd been in my stateroom often. We'd talked quite a bit. And I remember he must have seen me looking and pacing. I kind of pace and I kind of rub my hands together and do that kind of stuff when I'm nervous about something. And he'd kind of see that things weren't going very well. I was thinking, man, I got this guy in tow, and I'm going to take him in. Should I just let him sink out there? And, you know, I'm just going through all these things in my head you can imagine, right? And he came over to me on the bridge, real quiet like, and he said, "Captain, isn't this when you usually pray?" I was like, man, could God say it any louder? So I literally, I mean, you don't do this on Navy ships very often. And I'm not a Navy now, so I can't do anything about it. But anyway, I went down to my stateroom. I left the bridge. I went down to my stateroom. I got down on my knees and I prayed. I was like, Lord, I don't know what you want me to do, man. You want me to let this guy sink out here? You want me to tow him in the harbor? What do you want me to do? And the Lord reminded me of a couple of things. I want to share those with you. When I first got to command, it's scary. It's bad scary, okay? I gotta tell you, it was scary when you get the first command, all right? I was. Now, I was the commanding officer and I was scared, all right? And I remember I had backed into this berth the first time, and I was thinking, I got back into the berth and everything. And I was doing a Bible study that morning, and the Lord showed me Psalm 34:4, and it says, "I prayed to the Lord and he answered me. He freed me from all my fears." Okay. He also reminded me of Joshua 1:9. "This is my commandment. Be strong and courageous. Don't be discouraged or afraid. For the Lord your God is with you wherever you go." Guess what? I went back up to the bridge and we took that guy into port. We dropped the line. The two tugboats picked him up. We turned around and went back out to sea. That was one of the greatest experiences of my life. You may be saying to yourself, really? Pray? That's your advice? Interestingly enough, the Constitution to which you will soon swear an oath was consummated with prayer. We will soon inaugurate the 45th President of the United States. But I'd like to take you back to the first inauguration, which was held in New York City on April 30th, 1789. We had declared our independence in 1776. But it took 13 years to get the Constitution ratified and the government established. President George Washington was sworn in at Federal Hall, where he gave the first presidential address before Congress. After that, President Washington led the entire Congress to a little stone church, St. Paul's Chapel, to commit the nation's future to God in prayer. I believe that prayerful leadership is proper leadership. I cannot count how many times I've been so far out of my element as a leader. And I choose prayer and God's leadership to make wise decisions. I urge you to prayerfully approach your commission and leadership of those placed in your charge. My second example for my command tour was a personnel issue that I dealt with. Fireman Moen was a damage controlman on board the USS Ingraham. Damage controlmen, as I mentioned earlier, they're the guys that repair stuff. They're the guys that keep the pipes from leaking. They're the guys that fight fires and do those kinds of things. Fireman Moen was an unguided missile. And he basically couldn't get his act together. I don't know if you remember, there's a John Wayne movie where a guy, you might as well have just Velcroed his rank on, because he was like, rip it off, put it back on, rip it off, put it back on, you know, because he was always getting in trouble. Well, that's kind of how Fireman Moen was. He was always getting in trouble. 3 times he came to captain's mast. That's basically where you get in trouble and you go see the commanding officer. And the commanding officer decides what to do with him. I had taken money away from this guy. I had reduced him in rank. I had done everything I could possibly think of to try to get Fireman Moen's attention. One time he was UA. One time he gets in a fight with somebody. One time it's dereliction of duty. I mean, the guy just can't get his act together, no matter what. And I was puzzled. So here's what I did. After the 3rd captain's mast, I started searching for what could I do. I decided to take a rather unorthodox approach in an effort to break through to this young man. I gave him this book, Finishing Strong, and tasked him to read it and provide a 1-page report. He complied. His report was not compelling. Right? In fact, I wondered if I had got through to him at all. I thought, what a colossal waste of time that probably was. All right? He did what I told him to do, which was good. He then got out of the Navy. It was time for him to get out, I think like a year later or something like that. He decided to get out of the Navy. 2 years later, when I was stationed at the Naval Academy, Mr. Moen found me and sent me a letter. He wanted to let me know that he was in his 2nd year of college, he was married, and had a baby boy. He was doing well in school and was excited about his future. He wanted to thank me for not giving up on him. He also thanked me for having him read Finishing Strong. Although he didn't know how it would apply to him at the time, he now said he had been able to apply godly principles to his schooling and family. I want to share one more story with you before I close. Can I get my glasses on? Too small. Very nice. Now I should look like a professor, huh? Yeah. In late 1880, a distinguished member of the British Parliament traveled to Scotland to give a speech. On the way, his carriage became hopelessly mired in the thick mud of a rural road. We ought to know what that's like around here, huh? A young Scottish farm boy suddenly appeared on the scene with a team of large draft horses. He quickly had the carriage out of its dilemma and ready to resume its journey. The gentleman insisted on paying the young man, but the lad refused. He was simply being a good neighbor. And neighbors help each other out when there is difficulty. The English lawmaker was immediately taken with the young man and his attitude. "Are you sure I can't pay you for your time and effort?" the gentleman asked. "Thank you, sir. but it was the least I could do. It was a privilege to help such an important person as yourself. The boy replied. What do you want to do when you grow up? Asked the man. I'd like to be a doctor, but I doubt that it'll happen since my family does not have the money for such education. Then I'll help you to become a doctor, said the politician. And as the years went by, the member of Parliament kept his promise. Nearly 50 years later, another famous English statesman was laying dangerously close to death due to pneumonia. Winston Churchill had become ill while attending a wartime conference, and England desperately needed his leadership as Hitler threatened to destroy their nation. Churchill miraculously recovered because his physician gave him an injection of a new wonder drug called penicillin. Penicillin had recently been discovered by a brilliant medical doctor, Alexander Fleming. Alexander Fleming was the young man who had pulled the stalled carriage from the mud. And the man who promised to return the favor by sending him to medical school was Winston Churchill's father, Sir Randolph Churchill. Randolph Churchill saw what no one else had seen in the face of that young Scottish farm boy. He saw potential, and his commitment to helping that young man reach his potential saved the life of his own son nearly a half a century later. And by saving the life of Winston Churchill, indeed, he may have saved all of England. You never know what an impact you're going to have. I realize that this was not a traditional commissioning speech. In fact, some may say prayer and principled biblical leadership are things of the past, but I urge you to adopt them as you commission and lead our nation's finest sailors and Marines. I am confident that you will be fine officers, and I wish you the very best in all your future assignments. Whether you serve for 5 years or 30, you will be making an incredible difference. Thank you for choosing a path less traveled. May God richly bless you in the United States of America. Thank you.
Thank you, Captain Pogue. We will now read the commissioning warrants for our soon-to-be commissioned officers. At this time, would the military members in uniform please stand? Attention to orders. To all who shall see these presents, greeting. Know ye that reposing special trust and confidence in the patriotism, valor, fidelity, and abilities of Jared P. Chapelier, Nicholas E. Victor,